Welcome, everybody. As folks are joining, please put your name and organization and pronouns in the chat so everyone can see who's joining, share that information. And I think we're going to get started. So we give the Heal Food Alliance folks as much time as possible to present their really awesome information. So welcome, everyone. My name's Andrew. He, him pronouns. I work for the Oregon Community Food Systems Network as the Farming for the Future Working Group Coordinator. We are a staff of 2 currently, and we have Shin Lee here as well joining us. And just wanted to do a little intro at the top here about what we're doing today. We are super excited to be welcoming 2 folks from the Heal Food Alliance to present to what this space is the Oregon Community Food Systems Network's Public Policy Skills and Engagement Opportunity Working Group. And this working group is a little ad hoc. We use it as a space for folks to come and learn, build skills, build confidence in public policy and advocacy in the food system space. And we have had the privilege and the pleasure to being supported by Eric Chi, who was our policy intern for the last legislative session, Oregon legislative session. In that, Eric has moved on. He moved into his graduate research. And we also have 2 members of our community, Jen and Mackenzie, who are our leads for this group and have been working behind the scenes, bringing these sessions on the Farm Bill together. And this first one that we're doing, we're thinking, so basically we've heard from folks across the network that there's a lot of interest in engaging in the Farm Bill. There's a lot of understanding that it's important to the work that we're doing, but not as much deep knowledge of how to engage and what it really means. And so, doing some research, this working group folks, we found Heal Food Alliance's Farm Bill platform. We were very impressed and reached out and said, hey, we want to learn from y'all what you all are doing. It's really good stuff. So please come and help inform our network, and we would benefit from that. And so we were fortunate enough that we have Ashley Fent, campaigns researcher, and Celise Christie, organizer at the Heal Food Alliance, who said yes, that they would like to come and share their understanding of the Farm Bill, their platform, and all that with us. And so I'm going to leave all those details to them. And just want to say a huge thank you to Ashley and Celise for their time and attention. And let's welcome them to this space. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you all so much for joining today. I'm going to share my screen, get the slides going, and I think you all can see that now. Amazing. So I'll just briefly introduce myself, and then Ashley will jump in to introduce herself when I pass over the presentation over to her. But yes, or maybe we can introduce ourselves now, actually, before we jump in. Yeah. So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Celise Christie, as Andrew shared. I'm an organizer over at Heal Food Alliance. I do a little bit of work in many different places, but my home is in our campaigns kind of project area, working on corporate consolidation within the food system and addressing that and antitrust issues as well. And I support some of our Farm Bill work alongside Ashley with our members, and then also help to work on tracking internal member engagement and how our members are engaging with each other and engaging with our programs and our initiatives. And then I'll pass it to Ashley to introduce herself.
Thank you, Celise. So I'm Ashley. I use she, her pronouns. And I am a campaigns researcher at HEAL, which kind of means a lot of different things. But right now, given that it is a Farm Bill year, it's meant a lot of background research and writing around our Farm Bill work. So And I should say, I think a lot of us at HEAL are just kind of figuring out Farm Bill work. So this is a learning process for a lot of us. We do have some members of our staff who are, a lot more familiar with Farm Bill. But just to say that, this is kind of an area where all of us are growing together. So.
Yes, and amazing. Thank you, Ashley. And I can't see the chat, so if there's things that pop up in the chat, Ashley, let me know. The benefits of Zoom and screen sharing. But for today, for our agenda, we want to kind of share with you all a little bit about what is HEAL, what's in the Farm Bill, HEAL's work, our current work on Farm Bill and how we're doing that, the process that we've gone through, our priorities that we've set, our recent wins, what we're looking at moving forward from where we're at now, and then what we're hoping to learn more about as we continue to work on Farm Bill. And then we have some time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or hold on to them. But we'll address them at the end for, we've designated a bit of time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. So just hold on to them until then, if that's okay. And so first, just to give you all a brief kind of introduction to what HEAL is, who we are, how it began. So HEAL at its inception is very young. It's 6 years old. It turned 6 this year. But HEAL was originally born out of, no particular single individual organization, but really it came through people coming together from different sectors to really think about what transforming our food and farming system really looked like, and what kind of skills or roles and resources like organizing would look like to really initiate real change in a systems format. And so actually our founding director, Navina, really kind of anchored the alliance along with folks from Food Chain Workers Alliance, the National Black Food Justice Alliance, Real Food Generation, and the Union of Concerned Scientists. So each of these are what we call our founding members, but also anchor organizations that really kind of cultivated HEAL to really create HEAL, what HEAL is today, which is our really national, multi-sector, multiracial coalition of organizations. And so our mission is really to build collective power to create food and farm systems that are really healthy for our families, accessible and affordable for all communities. But really, our vision is to then take that same platform as we're building collective power to really, launch forward and ensure that we have, and really ensure that people and communities have the rights and means to produce, procure, prepare, share, and eat food that's nutritionally and culturally appropriate for them, and that's free of exploitation and in harmony and in rhythm with the rest of the natural world. Our makeup of our members. So we are currently just about almost having 40 members. That is national wide. So we have members all across different regions and different sectors. And so we represent, again, all different 4 sectors that are made up of the HEAL acronym. So health, environment, agriculture, and labor. So that's what HEAL stands for in general, and that's really a good representation of our membership in general. And we do just a brief snippet about the difference between our members. So we have core members and connecting members, but we prioritize really ensuring that our core members are BIPOC-led and or base building organizations that really work directly on the frontline communities to really address, all of the issues that we're wanting to address within food and farming systems. But we do have members who aren't BIPOC-led or BIPOC-focused, but do have an emphasis on working with BIPOC communities and or lending resources to BIPOC communities, and those are our connecting members. So just to kind of break that down. And how do we operate? So we have, not I want to say tiny, but very mighty team that works all across the US too. And so just wanting to share a brief snippet about how we operate and how our work is really broken down. So we have 5 core areas. 1 is connecting and uniting groups. 2, political education and analysis, which incorporates some of our Farm Bill work. 3, advancing a shared narrative, which is like our communications work. 4, connecting to nurture existing and emerging campaigns, which is where I kind of live in our campaigns world. And then 5 is organizing funders for BIPOC-led grassroots movement for change. So one, just sharing a little bit, is how we do that within our membership. So our membership in general is a place where we're able to, really build relationships and connect individuals and folks across multiple sectors, race and geography. So thinking about how our members can work together on collaborative projects or support each other in different campaigns, and doing that through multiple different facets through our member calls or member meetings, things like that. Number 2, advancing a shared narrative. This really works with our platform for real food and our platform toolkits, our webinars, our Farm Bill guide, our messaging guide, things that we work to put, and publish our shared narrative out on behalf of ourselves and our members, and really uplifting our members' voices. 3 or 4 is really connecting and nurturing existing emerging campaigns. And so this kind of comes back to our Good Food Communities kind of campaign that we were just recently published a procuring report around how to address procuring issues within food systems, particularly with like meat workers, and food systems workers as well. And then we have another kind of coalition group that we're working with internally to work on addressing corporate consolidation within the food and farming system, that recently published out a sign-on letter addressing like a grocery campaign or grocery merger between Kroger and Albertsons. So that's where some of that work kind of leans into. And then 5, organizing funders for BIPOC-led grassroots movement for change. So this really focuses on how HEAL partners with philanthropic communities to really democratize how like decision-making and redistributing resources looks like for other organizations. And so one of this working groups that we've led is called LIFE, which stands for Liberating Investment in the Food and Farm Ecosystem. So through this working group, they've been able to crowdsource funding to really get to smaller organizations that wouldn't be eligible for, bigger grants, but being able to do that collectively as a coalition. And then lastly, our political education and analysis work is really where all of our like key components on how we're really understanding and addressing the policies and political landscape, and how we as a coalition work together to take powerful action on any of the opportunities that emerge, particularly looking at Farm Bill. And then one of the programs that we lead is SOPL, which stands for our School of Political Leadership, where individuals are able to apply and work on a campaign together and learn about campaigns and how to do that. And so, just to kind of dive into Farm Bill a little bit more, that's just a quick synopsis of HEAL, who we are, what we do, and how we do our work. And then now to kind of dive into Farm Bill, I'll pass it to Ashley to share a little bit more.
Great, thank you, Celise. So we can go to the next slide. So just to start out, we all have different kind of levels of familiarity with the Farm Bill. And so we wanted to just get kind of a, take a temperature on how familiar folks are with the Farm Bill. So if you could share in the chat, just on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being like, don't know anything about the Farm Bill, to 5 being like knowing a lot about the Farm Bill. That'll just kind of help us gauge. So lots of 3s, heard about it, know a little bit about it. Great. Okay, so we can hop to the next slide. So the Farm Bill is one of the most critical pieces of legislation that shapes our food system. It's important to anyone who eats, right? All of us, to people who farm, people who produce food, distribute food, workers. It's super, super important to everyone, even though it's often kind of talked about or like not talked about, right, by a lot of people, and not that much is known about it widely. So the 2018 Farm Bill was involved investment of about $428 billion. So this is a really huge piece of legislation, and it's renewed every 5 to 7 years. There's a little bit of flexibility in terms of when exactly it's renewed, but it does have to be renewed, because if it is not renewed in the kind of within that flexible time frame, it reverts us back to the first Farm Bill, which was in 1933. And obviously a lot of things have changed since then. We do not want, like, we cannot go back to that. Like, it would be like kind of a collapse. So we do have to get it passed. And as folks know, we're in a Farm Bill year right now. And so there's kind of a process going on where members of Congress are drafting it, hopefully, at the moment. The first Farm Bill was created in 1933, and it was part of the New Deal programs that were initiated by Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration. And it had three main goals. The first was to stabilize prices for farmers. The second was to ensure food access. And the third was to conserve land and resources. So what was happening at the time was that farmers were producing more and more and more and more grains. And that was due to a number of reasons. So there were kind of a lot of capitalist incentives that were pushing for more and more production. There were a number of speculative investments in land, and there had been recent tech innovation at the start of the 20th century involving tractors and the production of nitrogen fertilizers. And so all of this was producing a situation of overproduction. So farmers were producing more grain. The result was that there was a glut on the market, so prices were falling, so people were planting even more, right? And so it was just this vicious cycle of overproduction that was bringing more and more land under cultivation. And as we know, this intensive land use and the resulting soil depletion that happened was a major contributor to the Dust Bowl, which was kind of happened right before the Great Depression. So in this context, there was an increased awareness of the need for conservation and the need to support farmers. So what the Farm Bill did was that it authorized the US government to purchase some of the grain from farmers and then keep it in reserve. And so this allowed prices to stabilize and it guaranteed payments to farmers. At the same time, it allowed the government to redistribute some of those excess grains and excess food to people who needed it. And farmers, as a result of this, didn't have to plant more and more and more crops to try to keep up, and they could instead leave some of their land fallow and in conservation practices. So the Farm Bill, by introducing government support, kind of allowed all of these goals to be met at the same time. We can hop to the next slide. So there are 12 titles of the Farm Bill. I'm not going to go through all of these individually, but all programs under the Farm Bill fit under one of these titles. And it's also possible to add titles. So the conservation title was added, I believe, in 1985, and then the energy title was added in the early 2000s. We can go to the next slide. By and large, the vast majority of Farm Bill spending goes toward nutrition programs, including the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. This is the program that used to be referred to as food stamps. And within the Farm Bill, there are some programs that receive what's called mandatory program spending, or they're also called entitlements. And these are written in such a way that a certain amount of money is guaranteed for that program every year. There's also discretionary spending, and in these programs, the appropriations committees decide how much to spend on that program for the next 5 years. So we can hop to the next slide. So just to go through a little bit of the process of the Farm Bill, I'm not going to go super deep into this because when I did a practice run, this was like took way too much time, and I was like, nope, we're not doing that. So if folks have questions, we can talk about that. But basically, the Farm Bill, right now, we're kind of in this reauthorization period, which is what happens every 5 to 7 years. The current Farm Bill expires on September 30th. We're almost certainly not going to have a new Farm Bill by then, but hopefully we'll have some draft text coming out soon. So what happens is that the House and Senate Agriculture Committees separately draft kind of title by title versions of the Farm Bill. And then those drafts are voted on by the House and the Senate separately. And then they're taken to a conference committee and reconciled such that there's one version of the Farm Bill that's then voted on by the full floor. And then when it's approved by Congress, is taken to the White House for approval. So as this process is happening, like even prior to drafting and during drafting, members of Congress hold hearings, and they have one-on-one lobbying visits. Like, so HEAL, for example, has done, and our members have done lobbying visits. And the goal of these is to really inform members of Congress about what we think needs to be in the Farm Bill. Of course, it's also important to keep in mind that corporations and mega farms are also having lobbying visits at the same time to kind of bend the ear of politicians. So while and before the Farm Bill is being drafted, that's really kind of the key point for intervention, is getting issues and priorities on the table. There's also, this period has a lot of introduction of what are called marker bills. These are kind of smaller bills that legislators introduce that they hope will become a part of a bigger bill like the Farm Bill. They're not expected to pass individually, but are kind of like these building blocks that have policies that we want to get incorporated into the Farm Bill. And the more support those marker bills get in Congress, the more co-sponsors they have, the more likely that bill has a chance of getting into the Farm Bill. So once the Farm Bill is approved and passed, then it goes to the appropriations committees in the House and Senate. And that happens, the appropriations committee sees these every year. They pass an appropriations bill. And it goes through a similar process as the Farm Bill, like the House and Senate doing their own version, coming together. And the important thing to note is this is especially important for discretionary funding, which I mentioned a minute ago. So appropriations committees decide how much to spend on given programs. And so there's an opportunity there for similarly holding hearings, meeting with members of the appropriations committees to basically provide reasoning for why a certain program needs X amount of funding or needs more funding. The impact of that program on, for example, farmers or ranchers or consumers. There's also some loopholes in which the Appropriations Committee can actually pass changes in mandatory program spending, which is called CHIMPs, and other kind of mechanisms for getting around and overriding what the Farm Bill has allotted for those mandatory program spending. Then after that, the Farm Bill goes into kind of a rulemaking phase. So USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, has to figure out how to implement the policies in the Farm Bill. So it writes like the rules and the kind of policies and formats it's going to use to do what the Farm Bill is asking. So in this phase, there's opportunities for activism and grassroots input into how those rules are written. So people or community groups meet with USDA officials to kind of make the case for why a certain program should be structured or implemented in a certain way. And then there's an outreach and evaluation period where USDA is basically getting the word out about its programs and evaluating their success. You can hop to the next slide. So there's a number of problems with the Farm Bill. The first kind of key thing that we have to remember is that it was created within a system of what cultural theorist Bell Hooks called white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. It was created within that system, and so of course it reflects many of the biases and exclusions that are inherent in that system that we live in. So as we know, the land that many white landholders had and have in the United States was stolen from indigenous peoples who were on this land, who had stewarded it for many generations. There was also exclusions and laws that were passed to prevent Black people from owning land and then to steal that land once it was provided. So the Farm Bill comes into this and of course kind of sees like the archetypal like white male kind of large scale landowner as the person who this legislation was designed for. And to this day, a lot of the people that receive Farm Bill support fit that kind of profile. So that's one of the things that like we at HEAL are really trying to change. Additionally, the Farm Bill and other labor laws of that era excluded farm workers. And the reason that they excluded farm workers is that at that time, most farm workers in the United States were Black. And this exclusion was explicitly a concession made in Congress to appease Southern white legislators who wanted to keep Black farm workers in a perpetual state of impoverishment. So there's also been a lot of rampant USDA discrimination against BIPOC producers in terms of denying credit, denying access to other program support. There have been a number of legal cases that folks may or may not be familiar with that demonstrate the enormous impact and widespread nature of USDA discrimination. And the Farm Bill has also been subject to increased corporate influence, especially since the 1980s. As a result, there's a lot of subsidies that are basically government payments, which were initially designed to support small-scale family farmers, that now go to large mega farms that are growing crops in monoculture. And the Farm Bill often favors the demands of corporate lobbyists. So politicians are often kind of swayed by what corporate lobbyists are doing and asking for at the expense of social justice, labor rights, environment, and other kinds of considerations. Go to the next slide. So the consequences of the way that the Farm Bill has been written and has been implemented. One major consequence is large-scale land loss, especially among Black farmers. So over the course of the 20th century, Black farmers lost over 90% of their land. Current studies suggest that this amounts to about 14 million acres of land, and the kind of estimated cost of that was around $326 billion. That's a very conservative estimate, in fact. In 1910, 14% of farmers were Black compared to 1% today. And this is a direct result of, as I mentioned, USDA discrimination around access to credit, access to program support, as well as the failure until very recently to recognize heirs' property and other forms of inheritance that don't rely on legal land titles. We also have seen that the way that the Farm Bill has been structured has kind of ingrained this very fossil fuel intensive model of production. Globally, we know that agriculture accounts for around 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, and it's the single largest contributor to biodiversity loss, extinction, insect apocalypse, all of these things. And the way that we've structured our agricultural system, which is a direct result of the Farm Bill, very much kind of sets us down that path. You can go to the next slide. And as a result of huge corporate influence and corporate lobbying, we have also seen less interest in antitrust enforcement and increased consolidation, corporate consolidation in our food and farm system. So I'm not going to go through kind of all of these, but there are a handful of corporations that control seeds and tractor sales and beef processing and pork processing. And these monopolies allow a very small number of corporations to exert enormous power over pricing. And this is really bad for farmers and it's bad for consumers. So for farmers, it means corporations can charge whatever they want for inputs while making record profits, as we saw with the kind of global fertilizer price crisis that was happening. And for consumers, it means that corporations have a lot of control over like grocery pricing. So there's studies that suggest that a lot of the inflation that we're seeing now is a direct result of corporate power. There's also an emphasis on producing heavily processed foods, right? Throwing subsidies at corn production and things like that, rather than fresh fruit and vegetables. And that has impacts on widespread nutrition and health outcomes. And we have enormous amounts of food waste because of our kind of overproductive system. And that's happening even at the same time that 1 in 8 people in the country can't access the food they need. We can go to the next slide, please. So there's also, though, a lot of opportunities around the Farm Bill. So many, many years of organizing and advocacy by social movements and producers and grassroots organizations has led to a lot of really important changes in the Farm Bill. So just a couple of those things. One is the creation of the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program, which provides grants to people who are kind of starting out in farming. There's also programs that have set-asides for BIPOC producers specifically, and set-asides are basically separate pools of grants that are designated for certain types of producers. And so one of the things HEAL's asking for is like the expansion of those set-asides and more money being put into those more set-aside programs. There's also a lot of opportunities for making our voices heard among our elected officials. These are people that we ostensibly elect, as part of a democratic system. And so we have opportunities and rights to show up, to tell them what our priorities are, what they should be doing. We elected them. They are, at least in theory, accountable to us. There's also a lot of interest in climate change and a lot of concern around that. And that's an opportunity for intervention. So the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed accorded $19.5 billion in funding for climate smart agriculture. And there's also a lot of attention right now around the impacts of corporate control and a lot of interest in challenging that and pushing back against that in the Farm Bill. We can hop to the next slide. And then this is turning it back over to Celise.
Yes, thank you so much, Ashley. I was like already trying to answer some people's questions, even though we had instructed people that we'd answer them at the end. But yes, thank you so much for diving into that. So kind of Ashley gave a really beautiful, like overbroad overview of Farm Bill and how that works. And then now diving into how HEAL is working on Farm Bill. Ashley and I will kind of go over a little bit of like our process and what we've done, and then our priorities. So first, we really, wanted to, Farm Bill work has been ongoing, and many organizations have been working on Farm Bill for a lot longer than HEAL's existence. But we really wanted to take this decision to our membership to decide, how we want to engage on Farm Bill, and how, if we wanted to engage on Farm Bill even deeper and further than we have in the past. In the past, HEAL has worked on Farm Bill, but our involvement has been a bit, not so much in the nitty-gritty grassroots like advocacy. We've done work mostly grassroots with members of Congress, working on particular marker bills, working with offices more closely, but not as like a full-fledged platform that we're advocating on behalf of, but just really taken key kind of points or issues or challenges. Like, for example, we worked pretty closely with Cory Booker's office on the drafting of the Justice for Black Farmers Act, and then Protecting America's Meat Workers Act, aka the PAMWA Act. So these are kind of bills that are ongoing now, but these are kind of the avenues that HEAL has worked on in the past, but hasn't kind of taken on all of Farm Bill. And so we took this to our membership at the beginning, or at the latter half, midway of 2022, especially as just a synergistic opportunity came up, especially this year with Farm Bill being up for slate, and thinking about how we're really wanting to elevate our voices, not just in these specific spaces, but in a huge overall general space together. And we were able to receive general consensus from our membership that we really wanted to dive in to Farm Bill work together, and that we really wanted HEAL's role specifically to, one, emphasize like a BIPOC presence and engagement, particularly from these communities that have often been pushed out of these debates, but these conversations, storytelling, narrative, and advocacy. And then we started to then really work on what our process was to develop our Farm Bill priorities, to develop our platform and our slate of priorities that we wanted to advocate on behalf of our members and our alliance. And so at the end of last year, like I think around November, December, we put together a member survey that took elements from our HEAL platform and then asked about particular policies or issues that folks were really focused on or wanted to elevate or amplify. And then from that, we were able to draft our policy priorities and then took that back to our members to review, provide input and approval to then create what we have today. And so we were able to take all of those amazing things and then dive them into 5 priority areas. One is titled Providing Opportunities for All Producers, which really focuses on BIPOC producers, which I'll talk a little bit about here in a minute. 2, investing in communities, not corporations, which dives into a lot of the work on corporate consolidation, antitrust, and really trying to put power and agency back in communities, not corporations. 3, securing dignity and fairness for food chain workers and their families. This is kind of skimmed down to labor and how we're looking at labor being addressed in food and farming systems. So when we look back at those titles, the 12 titles that Ashley kind of highlighted, there's no title that talks about labor. There's no title or a specific area that addresses, farm workers, meat packer workers, workers in general, when we think about food and farming. And labor being one of our main kind of sectors that we represent within our alliance, we really want to amplify that in the Farm Bill because it isn't there. And when we think about labor issues in relation to agriculture, they're not prioritized in Farm Bill legislation, which is very key when we think about, all of the legislation that goes into food and farming. And then 4, nutrition, nourishing people. 5, ensuring the survival of ecosystems in our planet, which really hones into addressing climate and the environment, which Ashley will talk a little bit on later. So we'll just kind of dive into each of the 5 areas, but give a super broad overview. And then if you have questions, please feel free to ask during Q&A. But just briefly, for providing opportunities for all producers, Ashley highlighted earlier how the U.S. food and farming system has really relied on the exploitation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color producers or farmers, and how the USDA has well-documented track record of discrimination has really left these particular producers without adequate support. And so HEAL is really advocating that in this year's Farm Bill, that it really ensures that producers can really thrive by 1, prioritizing funding for all programs that support BIPOC producers, and then 2, have increased transparency, accountability, and access to all USDA programs. And so through this incorporates, improved access to credit and capital, improved access to land access and tenure, including urban agriculture. That's often forgotten about or left out of. And then 3, really enacting our provisions that we've advocated on behalf of or from the Justice for Black Farmers Act, like heirs property, resources for 1890 land grant institutions, the historically Black universities and colleges, and then also additional funding for technical assistance and outreach for BIPOC farmers. And some of this work has already been done in HEAL through efforts that we've already done already, but I won't dive into that for sake of time. Second is communities, not corporations. And so I think just as you all know, or I've heard of from Ashley in the kind of brief dive in of what is Farm Bill, really looking back at, our overall food and agricultural system, policies have really enabled an increase in consolidation within our food system. And we really explicitly saw this in the pandemic, where, we had a recent shortage of food, or the shortages, thinking about that, like really the consolidation of the food system is really a fragile one. And COVID really, exacerbated that at the forefront. And so for 2023 Farm Bill, we're really advocating that this Farm Bill must ensure the resiliency of our food systems by investing in community infrastructure for local and regional food systems. And so 1, we're really wanting to advocate investment in community-owned, appropriately scaled aggregation, processing, and distribution infrastructure, really looking at reforming and expanding the LAMP programs, or the local agriculture market programs. When we think about full funding grants, improved accessibility for cooperatives and community-led organizations, as I've mentioned. And then also wanting to expand the definition of what we call like value-added agriculture products to really include and products that really improve soil health as well as other ecosystem benefits incorporative of the local agricultural market programs. 2, anti-consolidation, anti-competitive efforts. So that really leads to our Packers and Stockyards Act, which really that act really amplifies even more that community infrastructure for local and regional food systems, particularly when it comes to meat processing and meat processing plants. So being able to advocate for more funding to then fund more local, small, medium-sized lockers that are being, lost to a lot of the consolidation that's happening with meat corporations. And then last but not least, like I mentioned, value-based procurement, and that really, USDA being able to focus contracts that should be conditional upon labor and environmental standards. So really emphasizing and enforcing those labor and environmental standards per USDA, particularly on some of these contracts that are being elicited through the programs. So yes, and then I'll pass it to Ashley, who's going to go over the last 3 policy priority areas.
Cool. Thank you. So one of the other policy priority areas that we have is increasing dignity and fairness for food chain workers and their families. So as Celeste mentioned, labor is not included in the Farm Bill. We really want there to be a labor title added. That's probably not going to happen this Farm Bill, but down the road, that's definitely something that we're pushing for. We're also pushing for the enactment of provisions in the Protecting America's Meatpacking Workers Act. And so there's a number of provisions for how to basically make meat packing safer and more secure employment. And so I'm going to just drop a fact sheet that we did on PAMWA in the chat for folks who are interested. Some of the provisions in PAMWA include not allowing companies to override federally allowable line speeds, which basically can increase worker injury and make it hard to catch issues, and increasing oversight by USDA, increasing inspections, and improving health and safety standards, allowing people bathroom breaks and sick time and all of these things. We also are pushing for there to be improved worker protections against harmful working conditions more widely in the food system, including around climate change, heat, and pesticide exposures. And we are pushing for increased disaster relief support for workers, especially again around climate. Can go to the next slide. Around nutrition, we are asking for the expansion of the SNAP program to people who are currently not considered eligible, including students, formerly incarcerated people, immigrants, and residents of U.S. territories. For folks who may have heard about the debt ceiling deal that passed earlier this year, they basically passed through increased work requirements for SNAP, which we are very much opposed to. This is something that will probably end up with around 750,000 people being kicked off of SNAP if they're not meeting those work requirements. And there are a lot of other proposals by Democratic lawmakers to try to navigate what was already passed with SNAP to prevent any further cuts and to advocate for expansion to many of the groups that we mentioned above. So SNAP is still kind of on the table, even though that deal was a serious blow. And we're pushing for the expansion and improvement of other nutrition programs, including the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentives Program, which increases access to healthy fruit and vegetable options. Can go to the next one. And our kind of 5th and final priority area is around ensuring the survival of ecosystems on our planet. So we're pushing for conservation programs to be expanded and improved, especially by expanding technical and financial assistance for organic, ecological, and regenerative agriculture, and with specific emphasis on providing that support to BIPOC producers. We also, as part of that, are pushing for the recognition of traditional ecological knowledge as a title, new programs that are conservation program navigators that can help BIPOC producers navigate these systems, and generally prioritizing BIPOC producers throughout existing programs as well. We are also pushing for reduced or eliminated payments and subsidies to factory farms, including concentrated animal feeding operations that are awful for the environment and for labor, and actually receive a sizable chunk of conservation payments and subsidies. So we're very much opposed to that. And we are also pushing for climate smart agriculture funding, including the amount that was provided by the IRA, to not fund what we and our network consider false solutions like methane digesters, carbon capture and utilization and storage technologies, carbon markets, and other kind of big, very expensive, very costly solutions that often are counterproductive to climate goals. And instead, we're pushing for the vast majority of that funding to go toward proven agriculture practices practiced by small-scale farmers, BIPOC producers, that are proven to have beneficial climate impacts. We can hop to the next slide. So we'll just talk about some quick kind of recent wins that we've had, and then kind of where we're going. So we brought a number of our member organizations to DC in March for a lobbying visit and for the Rally for Resilience. For many of our member organizations, this was their first time lobbying, so it was a really exciting experience meeting with members of Congress. We got some of our members featured in really amazing press pieces around the importance of the Farm Bill. We can hop to the next slide, please. We also, in late June, had a week of action around the Farm Bill. So we and our members met with 24 congressional offices virtually and in person in our districts. And our networks made 52 calls to elected officials to uplift our priorities and our key marker bills that we're pushing for. And we had social media posts that reached around 15,000 people per day. We can go to the next one. Around labor in particular, we're having a lot of success and getting a lot of momentum in Congress. We and some of our member and partner organizations held a labor briefing with Senator Booker's and Senator Padilla's offices in late July. And partly as a result of some of the work that we've been doing around labor, there were 2 labor bills that were very recently introduced by Padilla's office. So the Supporting Our Farm and Food Workers System Workforce Act and the Voice for Farm Workers Act, both are really exciting bills on this front. And we can hop over to Celise for what's ahead.
Yes. So just a brief kind of recap. So on where we're at currently with Farm Bill in terms of time. So we're currently here where it says where the star is in August. And so for the month of August, Congress will be on recess and folks will be going back, both House and Senate, after Labor Day in September. And so the time between, now and then being on recess and when they'll be back in session and when the Farm Bill expires at the end of September is a very, 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 very tight window. And so there's still, even though it's a tight window, there's still time to influence the bill. And so right now we're still working on being able to meet with members of Congress, be able to continue to advocate for our policy priorities, and then drafts will begin to hopefully work on like title by title drafts. And then again, the Farm Bill expires at the end of September, and then October, December into 2024, there might be amendments, votes, conferences, maybe a final passage. I think as of now, I think from my inklings and then from other folks on our team, it's, you ask people every day, like, where's kind of Farm Bill at? Where's Farm Bill at? Do you think it will pass? Do you think it'll pass? It's all still kind of like up in the air. And Ashley, I don't know if you have any insight too, and if others do too, if you want to put them in the chat. But I think at the finite point is I think folks are really eager to have Farm Bill pass before the next election, because they don't want it to go into the next election within 2024. So I think really trying to get it passed by this year, but I think still in the works. And there's some light at the end of the tunnel, and then some days it's brighter and some days it's dimmer. But I will say right now it's still kind of like TBD in process. But with that TBD in process, there's still lots of opportunity to continue to advocate, meet with members of Congress, meet with folks on staff, and continue to advocate for a lot of these issues. And towards September, we're really working at HEAL to continue doing another kind of media or like advocacy action set to continue to engage members of Congress and look at opportunities to advocate even further on what's included in the Farm Bill, and then also think about looking forward to in terms of implementation, just as like Ashley kind of mentioned with budgeting, like how the implementation gets set up. And at HEAL, we're also looking at developing relationships with USDA. We have this year so far really developed really great relationships with members of Congress, folks on the Hill, for folks to get to know us, our policy priorities. But as hopefully Farm Bill gets slated and then approved and then ratified, looking at implementation and then developing some relationships with USDA and how that funding gets implemented out to folks. And then, yeah, Ashley, if you want to chime in.
Sure. Yeah, just if folks are interested in learning more, here's a link to our Farm Bill website that has a lot of the resources. I'm just going to drop the link also in the chat. And yeah, invite you to check it out and learn more and reach out to us with any questions.
Yes. And so I'm going to stop screen share so we can all see each other. And if folks have questions, I apologize, now is the time. Time has just flown by, but yeah, maybe if we could dive into questions. And Dee, I see you have your hand up if you want to share.
Hey y'all, my name is Dee. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the farm program manager for Food Bank, where I support a cohort of 10 byproduct beginning farmers in an incubator program. So really appreciate the grounding in the Farm Bill, especially with all the work that HEAL is doing, and just like can definitely feel the passion and the energy in the room, and just really appreciate that, the virtual room. My question is, with the farmers that I support, there is often a kind of, how do I best plug in and use my energy effectively to advocate for, this reimagining of the Farm Bill in all the ways that y'all, find it out. And just was curious if maybe there were some offerings between like kind of low commitment, like signing things, all the way up to more direct testifying. And that's like specifically for HEAL, and then maybe with the room too, if there's known ways on a more local level that folks can take meaningful actions. Would love to hear that too. So that's my question. And thanks so much for your time and presentation and work. It's really impressive.
Thank you. Celeste, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, and if others have thoughts too, thanks Dee for that question. Amazing. Yeah, so how to best plug in farmers to advocate on Farm Bill, and then offerings. And I liked how you kind of mentioned like low, high kind of offering levels. I think the best way is to be able to build, I feel like one of the things is to build community. So before being at HEAL, I worked at a farmer member-based organization in Iowa. And I feel like I'm not a farmer, so I can't speak from a farmer perspective, but I feel like there's always that that tie between farmers. Like, I need to farm, but I also want to talk about these issues. And the more I talk about these issues, I don't have time to be on the farm. So there's always like that kind of battle. But I think being able to, you all as a group, as a working group, and then as an organization, how to build collective power as individuals who are working with folks on the ground to then best, link people or call people in when, not necessarily appropriate, when's best fit for folks' schedules. And I think too, for the local level, like, the offerings, I think there is like that low level commitment of sign-ons, or can you, advocate on this? Can we get a quote for here? And then high level, of course, is like being in DC at people's offices, like dialoguing about, XYZ issues. But I think just as you said, like at the local level too, one thing that we saw with our member week of action actually was during that week in June was actually meeting with members of Congress in district. So farmers themselves can request meetings with their members of Congress, like their senator or their House of Representatives or their representative locally at their local offices in state. And that can happen anytime. So like, honestly, in this month of August that they're all on recess, I don't know, again, like where they're all at. Some people might still be in DC. Some people might be at home. But being able to meet with people in their offices is great. And I will say, like, farmers hold so much power, like so much power than they actually think that they actually do have. Because oftentimes than not, like folks like myself or Ashley will be in these meetings with members of Congress, and they'll also want to speak to a farmer. Or they're like, do you have a farmer? Or do you have a quote from a farmer? Or what are they're asking us about what the farmers are experiencing. And so it's a joy and a benefit actually when you can kind of get like a 2-for-1 when you have like a coordinator or a policy, person, or not the nonprofit person, or the organizer, and then the farmer or the worker or the person on the ground, and both of you go to the meeting, because then you're both able to like work together to advocate, and the farmer can really focus on their story, and then you can focus on kind of the issues and the facts, or vice versa. But yeah, happy to follow up too, because I feel like I don't want to take up too much time, but yeah, I think really storytelling too, like really having farmers know their story and know that their story not automatically, but like beautifully synergistically links to a particular issue that is very important in the Farm Bill. Because we can talk about what the change needs to be, but their story is so much more impactful to like be able to tack on to the actual ask that we're asking for in that meeting, or the policy that we're wanting to change. But sometimes I think being able to help farmers be able to tell their story in relation to an issue or a campaign or advocacy action is really, really key. But I hope that was helpful. Yeah. And I apologize. I know we're already at time. Maybe, Andrew, do we have time for one more question?
Let's do one more question.
Thank you.
Maybe I have one if no one else has one. Thank you so much for your awesome presentation. Y'all's platform is really inspiring. I think we'll get this out far and wide across the network, and I think it's really informative to the work here. We don't have a lot of Farm Bill action that we're seeing in the Oregon food system space, so I think this is kind of inciting some of that obvious need. We hear all these pieces that directly impacts the work that everyone's doing. It's like, oh, it comes back to the Farm Bill. My question is specifically on the land access, market access land, and I'm forgetting the program now. There's a recent award that happened for farmers in Oregon and across the country to actually purchase land, and it was focusing on BIPOC farmers. And the program is the Access to Land Markets and Capital Program, and just wanted to hear if y'all have been hearing any news on that as far as your communications with decision makers on if there's continued funding or expansion of that program, or if it'll be cut, any information there.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Celeste?
I do not. I think great question. The question of if we've heard if there's a additional expansion of the program or additional funding. I haven't heard particularly about that program in particular, and I don't want to say it's not good. I think it's connected into the things that we're also advocating for as well and pushing for. And I will say, I can say, I know like ourselves and like National Young Farmers Coalition, I know NSAC, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, I think even RAFI too. I always forget what RAFI stands for, but they're based in North Carolina. But all different, you know, farmer sustainable ag organizations are also all have a really big platform on land access. So I know in particular, specifically for Oregon, I am so sorry, I can't speak particularly for the state of Oregon, but I do know as a general whole, many like there's a huge like movement on land access funding. And so maybe we could follow up actually, Andrew, and like maybe dialogue to think about maybe how we could work with you and others locally on advocating for these, for particularly this program, or connect you with folks. But I know there's a lot of effort and around land access, like that and like climate is like hot topics. So I don't think I have maybe some inkling of faith that it's hopefully not going to go away, but that's always the hard thing is like that money is going again in competition with other funding too. So it's just, you know, whose voice is louder to really advocate for consistent funding time and time again, because we see with USDA programmings that sometimes these awards are handed out for 1 year, but not consistently. And so being able to provide, what do you call that? Like not proof, but just the impact. One is the impact, two, like how the money was implemented, and then three, like long-term benefit. Being able to provide that data when advocating for these fundings is really key, especially when they're like those 1 year or like these are this one-time kind of funding or project or program. Yeah, to ensure that the program continues is really crucial. But USDA, I know when people talk to them, they're always asking that information, like how was it implemented? How are people benefited? Did it work? Did it not work? And like, what are some of the, if it was continued to be funded, what are some of the long-term benefits? So if those are things that you all are collecting now, please do, and then be able to talk to your local USDA folks, and then happy to follow up too. But
Great. Well, thank you all so much. This is fantastic. We'll share out the recording to the network, and just really happy to have made this initial connection with the Heal Food Alliance and you all, and really appreciate your time and effort. So round of applause to Ashley and Celise for this amazing presentation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all for having us. It's great to see everyone.
We'll see you all next time. Take care. Have a good rest of your day.